versa. It controls what Jonathan Rauch describes in his new book, The Constitution of Knowledge, as the epistemic regime, the massive network of academics and analysts who determine what is true. Most of all, it possesses the power of consecration. It determines what gets recognized and esteemed, and what gets disdained and dismissed. The web, of course, has democratized taste-making, giving more people access to megaphones, but the setters of elite taste still tend to be graduates of selective universities living in creative class enclaves. If you feel seen in society, that's because the creative class sees you. If you feel unseen, that's because this class does not. Like any class, the Bobos are a collection of varied individuals who tend to share certain taken-for-granted assumptions, schema, and cultural rules. Members of our class find it natural to leave their hometown to go to college and get a job, whereas people in other classes do not. In study after study, members of our class display more individualistic values and a more autonomous sense of self than other classes. Members of the creative class see their career as the defining feature of their identity and place a high value on intelligence. Usage of the word smart increased fourfold in the New York Times from 1980 to 2000, according to Michael Sandel's recent book, The Tyranny of Merit, and by 2018, usage had nearly doubled again. Without even thinking about it, we in the creative class consolidate our class standing through an ingenious code of openness. We tend to like open floor plans, casual dress, and eclectic localist tastes that are willfully unpretentious. This seems radically egalitarian because there are no formal hierarchies of taste or social position. But only the most culturally privileged person knows how to navigate a space in which the social rules are mysterious and hidden. Seamus Rahman Khan is a sociologist who attended and then taught at St. Paul, an elite New England prep school. As the meritocratic creative class displaces the old WASPs, he observes, what the school primarily teaches is no longer upper-crust polish or social etiquette, but ease, the knowledge of how to act in open environments where the rules are disguised. A student who possesses ease can walk into any room and be confident that she can handle whatever situation she finds. She knows how to structure relationships with teachers and other professional superiors so that they are treated both as authority figures and as confidants. A student in possession of ease can comfortably engage the cafeteria workers with a distant friendliness that at once respects social hierarchy and pretends it doesn't exist. A student with ease knows when irony is appropriate, what historical quotations are overused, how to be unself-conscious in a crowd. These practices, as Khan writes in Privilege, his book about St. Paul, can be absorbed only through long experience within elite social circles and institutions. Openness in manners is matched by openness in cultural tastes. Once upon a time, high culture, the opera, the ballet, had more social status than popular culture. Now social prestige goes to the no-brow, the person with so much cultural capital that he moves between genres and styles, highbrow and lowbrow, with ease. Culture is a resource used by elites to recognize one another and distribute opportunities on the basis of the display of appropriate attributes, Khan argues. Today's elite culture, he concludes, is even more insidious than it had been in the past, because today, unlike years ago, the standards are argued not to advantage anyone. The winners don't have the odds stacked in their favor. They simply have what it takes. I wrote Bobos in Paradise in the late Clinton era. The end of history had allegedly arrived. The American model had been vindicated by the resolution of the Cold War. Somehow, we imagined, our class would be different from all the other elites in world history. In fact, we have many of the same vices as those who came before us. I got a lot wrong about the Bobos. I didn't anticipate how aggressively we would move to assert our cultural dominance, the way we would seek to impose elite values through speech and thought codes. I underestimated the way the creative class would successfully raise barriers around itself to protect its economic privilege, not just through schooling, but through zoning regulations that keep home values high, professional certification structures that keep doctors' and lawyers' incomes high while blocking competition from nurses and paralegals, and more. And I underestimated our intolerance of ideological diversity. Over the past 5 decades, the number of working-class and conservative voices in universities, the mainstream media, and other institutions of elite culture has shrunk to a sprinkling. When you tell a large chunk of the country that their voices are not worth hearing, they are going to react badly. And they have. The reaction. If our old class structure was like a layer cake, rich, middle, and poor, the creative class is like a bowling ball that was dropped from a great height onto that cake. Chunks splattered everywhere. In The Great Class Shift, Thibaut Musser argues that the creative class has disrupted politics across the Western world. In nation after nation, the rise of the educated metro elite has led the working class to rebel against them. Trump voters listed the media, the epitome of creative class production, as the biggest threat to America. The more than 150-year-old alliance between the industrial working class and what one might call the intellectual cultural left is over, observes the Swedish political scientist Bo Rothstein. The working class today vehemently rejects not just the creative class, but the epistemic regime that it controls. In revolt, populist Trump voters sometimes create their own reality, inventing absurd conspiracy theories and alternative facts about pedophile rings among the elites who they believe disdain them. The dominance of the Bobos has also engendered a rebellion among its own offspring. The members of the creative class have labored to get their children into good colleges, but they've also jacked up college costs and urban housing prices so high that their children struggle under crushing financial burdens. This revolt has boosted Bernie Sanders in the U.S., Jeremy Corbyn in Britain, Jean-Luc Mélenchon in France, and so on. Part of the youth revolt is driven by economics, but part is driven by moral contempt. Younger people look at the generations above them and see people who talk about equality but drive inequality. Members of the younger generation see the Clinton to Obama era, the formative years for the creative class's sensibility, as the peak of neoliberal bankruptcy. A third rebellion is led by people who are doing well financially but who feel culturally humiliated, the Booboor Rebellion. These are Mark and Patricia McCloskey, the rich St. Louis couple who waved their guns at passing black protesters last year. These are the people who elected as mayor of Toronto the crude, brash-talking Rob Ford, who attempted to put a very non-Bobo shopping mall, a suburban Disneyland, right in the center of the city. These are people who rebel against codes of political correctness. As these rebellions arose, pundits from the creative class settled upon certain narratives to explain why there was suddenly so much conflict across society. Our first was the open-closed narrative. Society, we argued, is dividing between those who like open trade, open immigration, and open mores on the one hand, and those who would like to close these things down on the other. Second, and related, was the diversity narrative. Western nations are transitioning from being white-dominated to being diverse, multiracial societies. Some people welcome these changes, whereas others would like to go back to the past. Both these narratives have a lot of truth to them. Racism still divides and stains America, but they ignore the role that the creative class has played in increasing inequality and social conflict. For all its talk of openness, the creative class is remarkably insular. In Social Class in the 21st Century, the sociologist Mike Savage found that the educated elite tended to be the most socially parochial group, as measured by contact with people in occupational clusters different from their own. In a study for The Atlantic, Amanda Ripley found that the most politically intolerant Americans tend to be whiter, more highly educated, older, more urban, and more partisan themselves. The most politically intolerant county in the country, Ripley found, is liberal Suffolk County, Massachusetts, which includes Boston. If creative class types just worked hard and made more money than other people, that might not cause such acute political conflict. What causes psychic crisis are the whiffs of smarter than and more enlightened than and more tolerant than that the creative class gives off. People who feel that they have been rendered invisible will do anything to make themselves visible. People who feel humiliated will avenge their humiliation. Donald Trump didn't win in 2016 because he had a fantastic health care plan. He won because he made the white working class feel heard. The new class hierarchies. The reaction to the Bobos has turned politics into a struggle for status and respect, over whose sensibility is dominant, over which groups are favored and which are denigrated. Political attitudes have displaced consumption patterns as the principal way that people signal class sensibility. The new map of status competition is worth pausing over because it helps explain the state of our politics today. Let's look first at the blue hierarchy. Atop the Democratic-leaning class ladder sits the blue oligarchy. Tech and media executives, university presidents, foundation heads, banking CEOs, highly successful doctors and lawyers. The blue oligarchy leads the key information age institutions, and its members live in the biggest cities. They work hard. As Daniel Markovits reported in The Meritocracy Trap, the share of high-income workers who averaged more than 50 hours of work a week almost doubled from 1979 to 2006, while the share of the lowest earners working long hours dropped by almost a third. They are in many respects solid progressives. For instance, a 2017 Stanford survey found that big tech executives are in favor of higher taxes, redistributive welfare policies, universal health care, green environmental programs. Yet they tend to oppose anything that would make their perch less secure. Unionization, government regulation that might affect their own businesses, antitrust or anti-credentialist policies. With their amazing financial and convening power, blue oligarchs move to absorb any group that threatens their interests, co-opting their symbols, recruiting key leaders, hollowing out their messages. Woke capitalism may seem like corporations gravitating to the left, but it's also corporations watering down the left. Members of the blue oligarchy sit atop systems that produce inequality, and on balance, their actions suggest a commitment to sustaining them. One step down from the blue oligarchy is the creative class itself, a broader leadership class of tenured faculty, established members of the mainstream media, urban and suburban lawyers, senior nonprofit and cultural institution employees, and corporate managers, whose attitudes largely mirror the blue oligarchs above them, notwithstanding the petty resentments of the former toward the latter. The Bobos believe in human dignity and classical liberalism, free speech, open inquiry, tolerance of different viewpoints, personal autonomy, and pluralism. But our class has not delivered for the people outside it. On our watch, government and other public institutions have deteriorated. Part of the problem is that, steeped in an outsider, pseudo-rebel ethos, we never accepted the fact that we were a leadership class, never took on the institutional responsibilities that go with that acceptance, never got to know or work with people not in our class, and so never earned the legitimacy and trust that is required if any group is going to effectively lead. According to the Institute for Advanced Studies in Culture, 65% of Americans believe that the most educated and successful people in America are more interested in serving themselves than in serving the common good. One economic rung below are the younger versions of the educated elite, many of whom live in the newly gentrifying areas of urban America, such as Bedford-Stuyvesant in New York or Shaw in Washington, D.C. more diverse than the elites of